Les and I moved to Odessa in 1982 when our girls were 2 and 4. We were at a church for 13 years when it became apparent our ministry there was done. Satan had been working to kill, steal, and destroy, which is his specialty, and he had a heyday in the church for a few years.
It was during that time where I watched really a church start to fall apart, and for various reasons, but it was Les Bowling's leadership that turned what could have been a real ugly situation into, I think, a real God-honoring situation.
We had made many friends in the congregation, and it broke our heart to see one family after another leave. The day after Les resigned, he got a call from Jerry Beaucamp. He and Paula had left several months previously. When Les told him he had resigned, Jerry said, "Les, you need to start a church." Several families came together and met and decided they wanted to become a church and asked Les to lead it. Les was hesitant at first because he didn't want it said that he had split Parker Heights. Our girls were a junior and senior in high school, and we wanted them to finish in Odessa. Les had already had some health issues and didn't want a church to start just so that he could have a job in Odessa.
And we thought, Lord, if you have for Les to be pastor of our church, then it doesn't matter, about his health problems. You're in control, Lord.
So we decided to pray about it for 30 days before giving a decision. The church met on the Sunday after the Labor Day in 1995. Billy Feeler's brother Larry had moved Odessa Physical Therapy from Central Drive to the location on Grandview. The property hadn't sold yet, so we got to meet there for free. There were mirrors on all the walls, so it became known as the Church of Mirrors. If someone came in late, you didn't have to turn your head to see who was coming in, as the image bounced off one mirror to another to another.
No matter which direction you looked, you could see
Lots of people.
side views, front views, back views.
Lots and lots of mirrors.
You could always tell when someone was nodding off or fiddling with their papers and not paying attention.
It was hard to sleep during the sermon because everybody could see you in the mirrors. If you picked your nose, everybody saw it, in other words.
There were 60 in attendance that first Sunday. Each Sunday after that, we grew. After 30 days of prayer and seeking God's will, Les gladly accepted the call to pastor this church. Instead of choosing elders right away, Les thought it would be best to start with the steering committee. These were men that he knew, and some had been in leadership with him in the past. Bob Batt, Billy Hex, Eddie Pomeroy, Terry Scott, and Freddie Pomeroy. Because of Les's physical limitation, these men were willing to be used however God wanted to use them. They filled in for Les preaching funerals, performing weddings, teaching classes, and preaching, sometimes with very little notice. After a few months in the Church of Mirrors, we found that it was less expensive to buy a facility than to rent one. The Lord led us to a deal on the west side of town to a church that was in a metal building next to a vacant lot on San Andres.
And it was ready for church the first day we walked in the building. A small church or small group had been meeting there. They had a piano, not pews, but seats, tables for the Sunday school classes. All we had to do was show up. When we outgrew that facility, which didn't take long, a building was basically given to us from Phillips Petroleum if we would come take it down and get it off of their property.
And so he talked to the people at the church about it, and a group of guys went over west of Andrews out in the middle of the oil patch one Saturday morning, and we went out there and ripped out the inside of it, salvaged a lot of the stuff, the sheetrock and stuff like that, but took everything out of the inside where it was just the shell, and then they were able to take down the shell and use it to expand the church on St. Andrews. So it was really a blessing, a big blessing being able to do that.
To build the building over on the west side with the building that Phillips gave us, the property next door had to become available.
Bobby and I were walking out in the vacant lot, and we found a sign on the ground that had the name of the owner. and a phone number. And I knew the lady. We called her, and they had that place, that land up for sale, and when we told her what we were about in the church and wanted to do, she made us a deal that we couldn't refuse also. So the Lord just had plans for us.
Within a short amount of time, we had doubled the size of our facility as the church continued to grow. There were times when Les struggled physically that he tried to resign because he wasn't able to do all he wanted to do and knew needed to be done. The leadership insisted that God wasn't dealing with Les only in this situation, but with the church body as a whole. Our Grace family walked by our side through the years of ups and downs. At least twice, the body literally surrounded our home, hand in hand, praying for Les.
What I loved about Les is that he didn't complain through his illness, and his attitude of just getting up there Sunday after Sunday when he didn't feel good and leading out and loving that congregation and the congregation loving him made for a close relationship among the people. Close.
You couldn't have asked for a better example of Christ than to look at Les.
He was just always up, always up. I mean, in the situation that he was in, having MS, being in a wheelchair, being blind, and he would make jokes about it. Like, I don't know if I'm facing y'all. I was told last week I preached to the wall. He was such a blessing. He's such a testimony to God's love.
So, one of the pictures that sticks in my mind is when Les got really bad. I don't even think you could see anymore. Donna would sit on the front row. Oh my goodness. She would sit on the front row because she had worked on his sermon with him. And if he would get lost in what he was saying, he would just look in her direction and she would just speak to help him along. So Donna is a woman that I greatly admire.
What I would say about Les and his sermons, well, I'm sure they were all good. But the sermon I'll never forget is the sermon that he and Donna lived out. They lived a sermon for all to see.
They did.
Les would be so proud of our 20-year mark. He said more than once that if something happened to him and the church folded, he would have been a huge failure because he wanted Grace to be built on Jesus Christ and not on Les Bowling. He said, "You don't see any scars on my hands and feet."
2005 was a pivotal year for Grace Christian Fellowship. In December of 2005, Les went to be with Jesus. In that year, God used the elders to begin the process of figuring out what was going to be next for Grace. And so during that year, they began searching for who would be our next lead pastor. Well, it was a hard time for our church. I remember it was also an exciting time because God had showed us that He was going ahead of us every step of the way, and He had prepared the way for us, and exciting things were around the corner.
Little did we know that God had used a church, a group of people called the Christian Church of Odessa, to come out on the east side of Odessa and spearhead, if you will, a location for a new church.
The very first building ever built on Billy Hext Road was Christian Church of Odessa, which Clark was the pastor. And Bob Batt and them were the ones that they had hired to build the building.
We were in that location for about 2 years, maybe 3 years. During that time, we lost some of our key contributors to relocation, and so we were in a bind, if you will. And I think maybe God put us in that situation in order to effect the changes that would come. It put us in a place where we had to trust Him. So we began to pray, God, open doors, open windows, help us through this situation so we can keep our building that we believed God had His hand in providing.
Their problem was they were not large enough in number to do what they wanted to do. We were at a place in time where we melted the two churches together, which in itself is another miracle. Most churches split. We came together.
In that year, we started the process of joining the two churches together. God led us to hire both Don Allen and Clark Rocca to lead us into the next phase of our church life.
I remember the Sunday after having chosen to join with Grace that our membership in Mass came forward and joined Grace.
When we joined with Christian Church of Odessa, we inherited the property on Billy Hex Road that we now meet in today. We began the process that took us multiple years of adding on to this building, renovating what was already here, so that it is now the church that we enjoy today.
And to this day, I see God's fingerprints all over this. So here we are now on Billy Hex Road, in a wonderful facility that God has provided us with. And if you haven't noticed, there's room to grow.
What is God going to do next in this church? I don't know. The fact that He brought a 26-year-old senior preacher to lead us into this next part of the journey has me very curious, but very excited.
God has shown me over and over again that nothing takes Him by surprise, that Grace is His church, and He will use who He wants, when He wants, for as long as He wants. Thank you, Jesus, for Grace Christian Fellowship.